Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Tuesday, December 11th edition of our community call. My name is Richard Brown. My title is, I think, the head of core community development. That's what it is. Actually not usually, recently David Utroben has been handling these meetings, but it's his birthday today. So happy birthday, David. And you're also gonna have to forgive me if I'm a little rusty. So, but without any further ado, let's kick it off. So usually what we start off with is give a little recap of what's been happening in the online world with MakerDAO. And this week, like most weeks, has been fairly eventful, but nothing too earth-shattering. We had some interesting developments from the community, which is always nice to see. There was a new Maker Tools version went out with a lot of additional features. I highly recommend people check that out if you're interested in the ecosystem at all. Mike has done a great job. Mike McDonald has done a great job working on that tool for us. Provides a lot of deep insight into the ecosystem, and more insight is coming. And it's essentially something that we can talk about with Madison in a few minutes, because this is sort of her wheelhouse, but I'll introduce her later. Another amazing thing that's happened, well, amazing depending on how nerdy or how financially inclined you are, amazing thing that's happened is Stephen has released the part 3 of the governance risk framework. This is sort of the final piece of the puzzle. So if you're interested in how MakerDAO views governance, how it views assessing risk, how it evaluates new collateral types, this series of documents is a must-read. And it's a great way to get up to speed on what we're all thinking if you're interested in joining our Thursday calls, where we focus on governance specifically. There's been a few interesting articles as well, and some nice partnerships. One of the things of interest recently, for at least Maker watchers, is the interplay between Compound Finance and MakerDAO, and there's been some interesting things happening there. Compound, for people that aren't aware, is sort of like, maybe they won't appreciate this analogy, but I'll do it anyways. They're sort of like MakerDAO without the DAI. So it's the same general principle. You can you stake collateral, people borrow that collateral, and then people can earn interest on it. The interesting part of this little story, though, is that traditionally there's an algorithm that Compound uses to determine what the interest for borrowers and lenders are. Generally, that spread has been fairly unappealing in my own personal opinion, but recently DAI was added to Compound, and the market there has been fluctuating around 10-15% return for lenders. And there's a lot of questions about how could that possibly be the case and who's behind it. And we saw an interesting development in the decentralized finance space where people discovered that you can do something called whale watching now, or DeFi watching, where you can actually start following the blockchain, take a look at a block explorer, and try and narrow down exactly who's doing what and try and figure out why, which is a really interesting thing. And there's this great article in Medium, which I will copy and paste the link right now, which did some digging into that really attractive rate on Compound to try and figure out why it is. And it's all sort of speculation at this point, but it seems like there's one person who's really interested in rep, potentially trying to save a position somewhere in their CDP. It's worth a look if you want to get a sense of how crypto primitives are getting sort of mixed together and the way that impacts the market. We've also had a community member generate a new DAI explainer website for us, which was always nice to see, because getting content generated is always a tough call. So we love to see it when the community jumps in and helps out. Another online event of interest is that MakerDAO has now officially become one of the relayers in the POA network. We're all big fans of what they're doing over there. We're especially big fans of the XDAI sidechain or parallel chain. For anybody who's not familiar with what that is, actually, I'm not sure I'm qualified to explain what POA networks is all about, but in a nutshell, POA networks, they release parallel chains that are they have feature parity with Ethereum, and but their consensus mechanism is distributed proof of authority. So validators are signing blocks, which there's a philosophical debate to be had whether that's less decentralized or more. I'm not qualified to make that determination. But at the end of the day, what that allows people to do is transfer XDAI, or a DAI token, on their network with 5-second block times and microscopic transaction fees. So if you're interested in using DAI as a settlement layer or to just do transactions, it's a really great option. And we are happy to join in and do our part as a validator. So that was interesting from my perspective. Don Park, thank you, man. I'm loving this. Actually, we won't get into Mariano's burning question yet unless he shows up, because it's a tough one and it's not fair for him to ask tough questions and not be here to field some of the follow-up from that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Lenka. Surprise, Lenka. So if you want to tell us a bit about what's been happening in your world, I think there's a lot of cool stuff with Slush recently. Is that correct?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I have been last week together with our CEO and co-founder Rune and my BizDev colleague for Europe in Helsinki for Slush. Slush is actually quite a big event. This was my first year. It's mostly focused on startups, and this year they have been 20,000 people. So just imagine how big it was. I have been there for 3 days. There were some side events, just like around DevCon, there being like Prague Blockchain Week events. Well, this was like a startup focused, but I must say that they had quite a nice program when it comes to crypto and blockchain tracks. And yes, we have been participating in 5 different occasions, and the first day of Slush, December 4th, has been really busy for Rune, especially because he's been on one of the main stages in a panel discussing the implications of crypto finance together with Lily Liu. She is a co-founder of Earn.com, and Suna Amras, she's from Token Daily, and then there was one more guy. Sorry, I forgot his name. But again, very nice panel, very interesting conversations. In the evening, there has been a similar grouping of the crypto experts discussing financial inclusion and privacy. This was a crypto-only event where you skim 300 people out of 20,000 who are really corely interested into crypto and blockchain, and it's been full of really engaging conversations. We've given a couple of pitches, me and Gustav one each, and then there was like some private event that Rune also spoke at. All in all, the impression was that we met with 2 kinds of people. First group were the people who actually are familiar with Maker and actually are knowledgeable, already had CDPs or had some more specific things to discuss. And then we met with people who never heard of Maker, because this audience was startup audience. So it was really eye-opening for creating some connections and potential partnerships. And we had some really good meetings as well. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of it. And we also discussed that next year we would like to be more integrated into creating a really strong program for the local Nordic startup blockchain and crypto startups to be more involved. So I'm really looking forward to the next year. So that was basically my week last week. And it's been really, really great.
It sounds like you're pretty busy. I'm interested in sort of the distinction between the traditional startup community and the crypto community. Did you find that there was communication barriers, or was the startup community interested in crypto in general, or what was your impression of that?
I believe so, because still, if you think of startup events, AI and blockchain are still very, hot topics when it comes to that. It's just a matter of if these people actually are familiar with crypto or if they are familiar with the stablecoin concept. So that's kind of the level you build on. Yes, sorry, short answer.
That's good. I think that sometimes there's skepticism, or at least I've found skepticism in the it's weird saying traditional startup world, because startup used to be the new thing, but I think that we've kind of eclipsed that with crypto. So startup world is kind of the legacy world at this point. But I've noticed that there's occasionally skepticism when it comes to blockchain in that community. So.
Yes. And also, I don't want to say all the audience at this event have been relevant to us, so we also had to be kind of picky. So in that sense, it was nice to run into very diluted pool of potential interesting conversations, and also being at the event that actually was focused only on the topic. So it was really nice to do this variety, interact with different audiences. Like one of the events where I was pitching was actually focusing on the fintech companies in the Nordics. So there was another angle to group people that attend Slash. So it was really interesting. Depending what you're into, you always find your crowd.
Did you say you were pitching? Were you did you do a talk?
Yeah, 2-minute talk.
Is it going to be online?
No, actually, it's been a bit hectic. I just came to my hotel and realized that we had some misunderstanding, and I'm supposed to be in there and just talk for 2 minutes.
All right. Really,
but still, it was really funny because right afterwards there are some people. We need to talk. I know Maker. I have CDP. So it was really cool to actually get some people out of those crowds that actually knew Maker. And then of course there were some people who were just curious to learn more. So it was these two kinds of interactions I had, either knowledgeable or wanting to learn more.
Yeah, that's been in my experience as well. People either ask, can you explain Maker, or they ask you to explain some very obscure part of Maker.
Yeah. But I must give credit to Rune. He did really well. And I think it almost felt like we have been dominating the agenda there. There have been, I think I heard that Vinay Gupta had maybe 5 different participations. So, okay. But still, it's been it just felt like Rune everywhere.
Yeah,
which was really good.
In Prague as well, I began to feel a bit we were being rude by dominating all the conversation.
No, but the topics were interesting, and financial inclusion and privacy and crypto finance. Those are the things that we would like to be active in discussing. So it was really spot on, I think.
All right, sounds like it was amazing. All right, thanks, Nico. Mariano, you had La BitCon?
Yeah. Can you hear me well, guys?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I was at La BitConf in Chile, Santiago de Chile. It was my first year at La BitConf, and it was also the first year that BitConf, or La BitConf, are starting to showcase projects from another blockchain, right? It's widely known in Latin America as a Bitcoin conference. And this was one of the first years to start talking, for example, about Ethereum projects, right? And there I had a talk, like a keynote, and it was like a mix of Andy's talk at DevCon with a bit of history of money and also the differences between centralized and decentralized stablecoins and why, obviously, that is better. And the good thing about it is, although they were a lot of, let's say, Bitcoin maximalists on the audience, they really love the concept of the user being able to mint, right, having some collateral on the platform. That in that case they were very interested on this because this is like a certain degree of decentralization, right? Besides all the usual things that these Bitcoin maximalists say about Ethereum, right? So it was a really interesting talk, and I was approached after that by some other attendees, and they are really interested to see Bitcoin as a potential collateral for CDPs. They are really interested, we've been talking about a lot of this so-called wrap BTC, and the other one I think it's called 0x Bitcoin, if I recall correctly. And yes, they seem to like that idea, right? I mean, I think that we can agree all that Bitcoin is a good collateral for the CDPs. Although we know that we need to look for the decorrelation is the word, or to not being correlated to the crypto environment, and we know that mostly all prices are correlated to Bitcoin. But yeah, that was the talk. It was really good. We have also Suko from Zcash explaining a lot about privacy enabled coins. And yes, it was a nice trip, and mostly the whole week was about that, and well, meeting potential partners, right?
Mm-hmm. Zcash does a lot of work in Latin America, don't they? It seems.
Yeah, they are promoting like a big movement in Venezuela with this Airdrop Venezuela initiative. They have a presence there. They are working with Alejandro Machado for Open Money Initiative. I guess that at some point, this Shil Carson, I guess is the name, also from Twitter. I know her. She's working side by side with Suko on Venezuela initiatives too. They are like a whole bunch of different projects working towards this objective to bring Venezuela some help, right?
Mm-hmm. Actually, that reminds me. So, Airdrop Venezuela is something that's sort of gaining some steam out there that we've been interested in. Are there any other sort of charitable organizations that are doing good in Venezuela that we should probably be aware of?
Not I know. At least with a powerful project like this, they have this ethos, right? In which believe that you need to help people, or you need to help Venezuela from the inside and not from the outside. Okay, what is that? I mean, they want to give people this crypto, right? Because they think that if people start transacting crypto to buy products and services without having the need to transform into paper cash, something that they do not want, because obviously they do not have that paper money don't have any value, doesn't have any value. They think that if people start transacting for food, for services, and for other things, people will start realizing that they have the power, right? And that is like the main objective, to help people to know that they have the power, right? We have in a completely taken bank system. I mean, you can't send money to Venezuela without having some ridiculous exchange rate in disadvantage for the people. So mostly it's crypto, or probably something called, I think it's called Walla banking or something like that, in which something receives like an asset from one side, and they are doing internal transactions in their bank system. So it's all like a very dystopian picture of a world. And the sad thing about that is, for example, I didn't know that Venezuela is the country with the highest oil reserve in the whole world. I didn't know that. I have to check it, in fact, and it's, I mean, it's a sad history, you know, being one of the most rich countries in the world, having to or having this economy, having these problems, having all of the things. It's just, you know, it's like a weird thing.
Yeah, it's pretty horrifying. There's a long and shady history with. Well, actually, I don't want to get political.
Yeah, no. I mean, me neither. But sometimes you have to. I mean, yeah. Sometimes you have to.
I have the luxury of not having to, but maybe you don't.
No, well, that's the way I am.
Yeah.
That's the way I am. Sorry.
Actually, I'm going to Google the world's largest oil reserve. I don't know about that, but I know it's fairly significant.
I had the same thing with someone told me that, and then I Googled it, and yes.
Oh, if Google says yes, it must be true. Then. All right, I stand corrected. Are there any hackathons coming up or any other events on your radar?
No, that I know. We are now entering the summer vacations here in Latin America, so most of the events and that kind of things start to lower in a bit. So yeah, we have to wait for another event.
All right, so you guys get to take a breather. You've been doing a lot.
Yeah.
You guys deserve it.
Thank you.
All right, so let's keep on moving then. I'm not seeing anybody else from community in here, so maybe I will give a super high-level overview of things that I don't understand as I read them from a document that I did not write. So, Chow in APAC region had a Shanghai meetup on December 2nd with Status and Kyber, Beijing meetup on December 3rd, and a Shenzhen meetup on December 4th. Maybe we'll get details about that next week.
I just wanted to jump in that there's some sort of a status tour that Maker is doing partially with them. So this might be part of that status Maker tour in China.
Yeah, maybe we'll do some more research to figure out what that's all about. Andrew has a suggestion to have an uncomfortable conversation later. Maybe we'll get to that. All right. Do has some updates too. I know he's killing it in Korea. We've been avoiding South Korea for too long, and he's sort of making up for lost time. But I'm not going to steal his thunder, actually. So we'll wait for him to join next week, possibly, and give us an update. There was a lot of things happening in East Singapore, and I'm sure there's going to be a blog post or two about those, so I'm not going to go into that either. We do have a special guest today, though, that I'd like to get to before the hour gets too long. Madison Piercy, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes. Hi.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, maybe you should introduce yourself and tell us what your job description is, because this stuff fascinates me.
Okay. Hi, my name is Madison. I'm in I think it's Rose. I just started with MakerDAO last week, and I was hired as a data scientist. Previously, I worked at Tesla, Facebook, BlackRock most recently, and there I was building out systems to basically track where people were spending their money to try to beat the consumer index, obviously for them to trade on. And so at Maker, I'm going to help with deeper data science initiatives. So really understand what's going on network-wise, how to ensure governance is the best considering what's going on in our ecosystem. So that's why I was brought in.
All right, so I'm probably going to have too many questions because I don't know anything about how those things work, or like how your job would work. And I guess you're brand new, so it's probably not going to be fair to ask you a bunch of details about how you're going to do all this stuff. But how do you even begin to figure out what's going on in the ecosystem in general? But I guess the MakerDAO ecosystem, are you guys sort of beholden to blockchain data? And maybe exchange data, and you guys just sort of massage that until you get some picture that makes sense?
I think, yeah, so not beholden to any data set, right? Because anytime you build a model, right, if you, the data that you put in, then you're living in that simulated environment, right? So if we're only looking at exchange data, then we're really not understanding like any external effects. And that's to say that like, other social or financial, right? The stocks aren't correlated, but does Twitter have effect? Like there's a lot of other things that would push the exchange to act in a certain way. Location could also be one. So no, right now I've just kind of been learning as much as I can this last week, and then pulling all the exchange data for Maker activity, and then analyzing that. But right now, yeah, just kind of getting up to speed on all the work that the team's done so far.
That's something that we've talked about a bit in the governance meetings, is how the risk teams go about generating their models and how we verify that those models are reliable. And ultimately that gets into a conversation of where they're getting their data sets from. And then that conversation ultimately leads to none of the data sets conceivably in the crypto space are trustworthy because of like the rampant wash trading and all kinds of other nefarious things are going on. So what are the steps to get a data set that makes sense, or the one that we trust? Like, where would you go for something like that? Do you prioritize DEXs over centralized exchanges, or do you pick trusted exchanges? Like, how do you get information in this space?
Right. So I think obviously, you know, exchange data is important. But that's the thing right now. It's kind of, I've been pooling all of the data to understand different patterns or behavior. So right now I wouldn't say there's one that is more important than the other, but like creating a feature space. So basically creating the variables that are most important and should be considered or weighted most. That's kind of what I'm doing. So from all of the data that I'm collecting, it's figuring out which variables move which, because data is data, right? But I'm trying to create some sort of information. So like an extra depth of what currently is just like transaction, and like then you can get internal transactions. And yeah, so it's currently kind of just figuring out what's the most important thing, what is the end goal with Maker, and then how can I build a model to ensure that you know, there is a strong alpha that's created from that.
Are you going to be working with the risk teams primarily, or is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So so you're going to be part of establishing the processes, or I guess the models that we begin to use as standards for the newer teams.
Right. Exactly.
Wow, that seems like it's a lot of work.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'm excited.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it'd be cool. I would like actually drive me insane, but it'd be cool to read other people's work from this. What kind of tools do you use for this kind of stuff? Like how are the numbers crunched, I guess? Right.
So I use Python, Pandas library, which is it's an IPython notebook. So basically you can understand what the data that's going on. And then for machine learning, use PyTorch, but otherwise it's just, you know, data science processes like ETL of Postgres or Hadoop, anything like that. But it's mostly programming. So yeah.
Interesting, because this is something I keep on referring back to our governance meetings, but I guess there's overlap, so I'm going to excuse it. When we're talking about the risk models that these teams come up with, we talk about reproducibility and evidence-based models and all the rest of it. But this reproducibility thing is something that I've been trying to wrap my head around for a while. So is part of your job. So you mentioned Python, and I'm assuming like you use things like Jupyter. Is that part of your job?
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So would we be releasing these models to the public, where if we said that if the risk team came up with a proposal to use token XYZ, and here's the data set that was used, and here's the reasoning, would there also be some kind of an executable or some kind of environment where people could validate those assumptions?
I think that would be great, right? Because Maker is like a very transparent type of company, but I think it's also going to be like, how much do you want to release? So right, you want to mitigate all possibilities of like gamification. Obviously that's my job to ensure, but yeah, I think that parts will be released, but also data privacy is really important now. So I think that's going to be something that's probably discussed when we decide to when we're comfortable with the model that we've built, or like the first model, and then we'll probably obviously we would like to show parts or give access. So I think that's a discussion we haven't had yet, though.
It's an interesting consideration that I hadn't thought of, that the anonymizing the data is going to be hyper important, but
Right,
diluting
exactly.
it too much is going to be a tricky middle ground to reach.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Are you going to be forming a team or largely taking care of all this kind of stuff yourself?
I think maybe that is the goal in the long run. Right now, there's not a lot of data science in crypto, right? Because it is such a new space. So I think we're going to see how this goes. I mean, even in finance, when there's actually not a lot of data science going on there either. So it's kind of a new, I guess, field or for people in finance. So I think that it's great and it's super promising that Maker's already focusing on that. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I think that you're right. It's a new trend, which it seems a bit
Right.
strange, but it reminds me
I know.
how young our this entire environment is, where we're just sort of realizing that data analytics is kind of a cool idea. We should do that too, or maybe we should be like generating some graphs off of this stuff that we're collecting. So it's cool that we're sort of at the forefront, or at least we're doing it as well. So that's encouraging.
Yes, definitely.
Are you going to be doing any work outside of the risk teams, or will you be doing like reports on what's how the system is behaving, or just general ecosystem stuff in general, or is it mostly risk?
Right. So Steven is the one that he is the one that actually hired me. So his project is the larger project that I'm working on. But I definitely want to be. I think I'm going to try to be as helpful as I can to like marketing and biz dev and all that, right? Because it will just try to help streamline any processes that they currently have in place, or help with making them more efficient if possible. So yeah.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I think you have your work cut out for you, because there's no shortage of work to be done.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, right on. Thanks for that.
Thanks.
Let's see, what else do we have on the agenda? We have a couple. Mariano is actually here now. Mariano, I mentioned that you had a burning question, but I wasn't going to ask it unless you were here to field some of the questions yourself. Do you want to ask it? Are you still on the cam or on mic?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I've been having, I don't know, you guys have been having some troubles with Google Hangout.
I've heard that people are getting kicked off randomly today from a few different people.
Yeah.
So, Mariano, your burning question was whether people should be allowed to pay down other CDPs, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Nick actually is happily Nick is on the call. But as far as I'm aware, this is possible at this point, right?
I saw some message from the guys from InstaDApp from India, explaining to Amin Soleimani from Spank Chain how to do it, and seemed really, really interesting. And as you said, I didn't know that something like that was possible.
Yeah, well, I can give you some context, or I'll give the group some context. And this is something that I think is going to open up new markets for us, I think, in the future. So the question is, it arose initially around people having CDPs, and if they're smart, those CDPs are tied to hardware wallets and all kinds of other security loopholes, or not loopholes, security barriers that people have been put in place. But the problem with CDPs, in some people's experience, is that as soon as you get on an airplane, the market tanks, and it's very difficult to rescue these things while you're in transit. And so we've been discussing how do we handle permissions in this system? How do we allow different groups of actors to interact with the CDPs in non-destructive ways? And one of those ways that's the least destructive, obviously, is allowing basically anybody to top up any other CDP. It was possible in the previous iteration, but I think that once you migrate them to the new proxy system, it's still possible, but it needs to be called as an event directly against the contract. And Nick, can you let me know whether I'm correct in that assumption? Yeah, actually, Nick might not be on the call.
Nick.
He fell asleep. All right. Well, maybe it's something that we need to follow up on. But the reason why I find that this question particularly compelling is because it opens up new markets for us and for not for us, but for the third-party ecosystem, where we can start thinking about things like insurance and thinking about things like rescue services, and you can think about things like a third party offering a wind down service on a CDP that avoids people incurring liquidation penalties. So there's a lot of really cool things that can happen when you open up some of these events without having to worry about juggling custody. And I think that's where things get really murky in this world.
I think insurance is something big.
Yeah, it's huge, and I think that there's more interest in it, and I can't talk about too many details, but through the granting program, I've been working with a few teams that have some very compelling ways of implementing insurance. So it's something that I think we're going to see in the ecosystem, tied to CDPs specifically, but also insurance in general. This is a bit of a tangent, but I think that it's one of those sleeping giants that every once in a while this space sort of stumbles upon and realizes, oh my God, this thing is huge, and then people start dogpiling into it. So.
And being such a lucrative environment as insurance is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those staggering numbers of addressable market. I think it's like 15 trillion or something a year.
Oh my God!
Ashley, you had a question you wanted to ask or a comment?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, curious about what are on the Keeper network for things like CDP insurance. Obviously, insurance would be an example of the market becoming more efficient, right? And so it's good to have that sort of healthy competition, but at the same time, you want to basically like provide enough incentives for people to continue running these Keeper networks, so that they're not always maybe become a sort of insurance, like maybe we're getting a little bit closer to the pawn shop analogy than we even ever thought, right?
That's an interesting consideration.
It
hadn't occurred to me that potentially you're putting keepers out of business. If it depends, I guess, what the model is for the insurance mechanisms, whether the insurer is doing some kind of a top-up mechanism where they're ensuring that things don't get liquidated, or whether they're paying out in the event of liquidation. If they're paying out in the event, then the keepers still get their ends. But yeah, I wonder I don't know if that's something that we necessarily need to be concerned about, right? Like, this is the aftermarket, and apparently the strong are supposed to survive here, right? So it's just a matter of incentives. I know that some of the mechanisms that I've seen so far that have been proposed for insurance it's interesting the way that they're architected, because in some ways they can be viewed as an anti-CDP. So they require the same mechanisms. There needs to be a pool of collateral backing the insurer, and there needs to be actors in that system that are in charge of ensuring that the insurance is paid out. So you have CDPs, you have keepers, and then you have anti-keepers and anti-CDPs on the other end of the spectrum. So even if it did impact the keeper ecosystem, potentially those people could jump ship and then move into the insurance ecosystem and just start catching it on the other side. It's going to be really interesting watching how it shakes out. Particularly, I'm still kind of curious to know what more traditional businesses or traditional CFOs would think of this idea of, say, an organization came to their CFO and said, hey, you know what, we should open a CDP so we can do payroll and die. Whether the fact that there's this other crypto organization offering insurance on that CDP, whether that makes it more compelling or not, it's something that I'm not clear on yet. I'm assuming we'll get there, but it's still early days, so it's hard to tell.
Do you see a lot of services that you mentioned once this so-called privacy DAI from the Aztec protocol comes to life?
Yeah, you know what? I'm completely unqualified to speculate on that. I think that the way that privacy is a weird thing because we're all in this crypto space and we're all sort of in love with the blockchain. But I think that as a community, like as a global community, we haven't quite accepted the fact that it's an enormous invasion of privacy to have every single transaction you've ever done on the blockchain. Like if you think that somebody like Facebook can figure out what you're up to by your connections and when you're online, just imagine what Chainalysis can do by seeing your tweets and then comparing that against activity in the blockchain, and then bang, like you have an identity and a financial history. So it's a matter of time before there's this wake up moment in the ecosystem where privacy becomes a huge deal. And once we get to a place where everybody understands that privacy is a big deal and there's a way to implement that, then a lot of things are going to change mechanically. And I think the way that the rest of the world accepts it or rejects crypto is going to change dramatically as well. Because
true.
I think a lot of the frictionless adoption that we've seen in the past has been, and here's where I'm getting a bit conspiratorial, but I think that a lot of the reasons why some regulators can be friendly to the crypto space is because it is completely open. There's no, it's almost like a cornucopia of mineable data on people's financial transactions. It's better for a lot of, depending on where you live and the rule of law and the type of regulations that are in place. Lawmakers would be happy to have everybody just stick their bank accounts on an API somewhere that they can just be easily trolled, right? Yeah, they might change their mind if all of that stuff suddenly goes dark overnight. So it would be interesting to see how that shakes out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Your question about whether real enterprises would feel better about opening a CDP or working with Maker, I think yes. So for those of you that don't know me, by the way, I work here at Maker. So some of the partnerships that I'm working with, for example, one is a large commodities, physical commodities asset trading firm. So they own physical commodities in warehouses all over Asia. And when they're they're often borrowing against their inventory to go out and buy something new, right? They see a new deal in gold, and so they borrow against their aluminum or whatever it is. And that loan from the bank, these are usually like 60 to 120-day loans. They're fairly short term. Obviously, the goal is to loan within the time frame, but because of just shipping lanes and all these different things, occasionally there is a occasionally they're late, right? Or occasionally there is some issue and some reason that they need to basically pay some kind of fee, and that's sort of just like a cost of doing business. And so if there's a way to basically allow people to go outside of the sort of like very strict guidelines of what Maker's protocol allows via another service provider, for example, that provides insurance and opens it up to lots of different types of businesses that don't have like minute predictability on cash flow, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's good insight. I love the fact that you understand business and money, so you need to come to these things more often so you can explain to the crypto people what's actually going on. That's one of the considerations that I've been just trying to wrap my head around. I guess the fact that trying to convince somebody to get into crypto and they have reservations, and then saying, oh, but don't worry, we're also offering crypto insurance. That's the part where I'm not entirely sure whether that's a compelling argument or not. But I think that people are already on board in the ecosystem, and maybe it's easier.
I don't know that it's so much about getting people into crypto or crypto insurance. Like the people that I'm talking to, for example, they don't really care that much about crypto. They're looking for ways to borrow against their assets, right? But they need the same kind of flexibility that they can get from their bank. Otherwise, they can't do business this way, right? So I think could open up lots of new collateral types that otherwise wouldn't consider borrowing against their assets on Maker directly because of the risk of liquidation if they don't, hit some payment in time or what have you. If there's some kind of insurance or backstop as a service provider.
Yeah, that's interesting too. So I wonder if the existence of a aftermarket insurance ecosystem would impact the, yeah, that's interesting. So I'm speaking out loud at this point, so I have to apologize. So I guess that would help people to enter into the CDP ecosystem, and it would potentially affect the way that the risk teams evaluate some of these asset classes as well, right? Like some things might be considered too volatile to be an asset class, but potentially if there was an aftermarket that was willing to either top up and or unwind these CDPs, then maybe they become a more compelling option. That's interesting. There's a lot to digest there. Sorry, I just muted myself. Did we have any questions that people wanted to ask while Ashley's on the call? Actually, Ash, I can ask a question. Hey, Ashley, have we recently been listed on any exchanges that you'd like to tell us about?
Yes, you're listed on KuCoin. So go ahead and get on there. They're having a trading competition or something. Basically, if the top 100 people that trade DAI by volume will get 1 MKR each, and then I think it was like the top 5 people get, I don't know, like 15 MKR each or something like that. So, so yeah, if you have a lot of DAI or have been thinking about buying a lot of DAI or a lot of ETH with your DAI now that prices are so low,
Yeah.
go and do it, please. That would be great. Thanks.
All right, what pairs are they offering? Is the DAI the base pair, or is it just the trading pair?
So DAI, MKR DAI, ETH DAI, Bitcoin DAI, and then they're also offering MKR ETH and I think MKR Bitcoin, but I can't remember exactly.
Yeah. Are they offering DAI as the
DAI? So if you want to get out of your tether and get into DAI, that would be a great place to do it.
That's a great idea. So are they doing DAI as like the base of the pair, or is it like ETH DAI where you have to figure out like 0.003 or whatever it is?
It's base of the pair, yeah. So it's a listing, like a listing column.
All right, cool. Better than nothing. All right, I think that unless we have any additional questions, oh, we do. Andrew had a question. Would insurance providers for CDPs have some incentive to prop up the underlying collateral assets to avoid paying liquidations? That is a fascinating question that I had not considered. It's really interesting, actually. Well, I think that either way, that still works out to be insurance, though, doesn't it, Andrew? Like, ultimately, people don't want to be wrecked, and ultimately, we want to have as many healthy CDPs as possible in existence. And if the insurance provider just stops liquidations from happening as opposed to paying out, then potentially, I don't know, is that immoral or is that the same thing? That's a good question, though. I'm going to actually copy that for the next time I talk to one of these grantees. It's worth considering. Does anybody else have any opinions on the matter? Actually, that might have been a good one for you because it's more business related, unless we just lost you.
Sorry, my doorbell rang, so I missed that one.
All right, I'm going to read it out again because I want you to actually fill us in on this. Would insurance providers for CDPs have some incentive to prop up the underlying collateral assets to avoid paying out in liquidations?
About that.
It seems like even if they did, it would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Well, it would be a good thing for Maker, but maybe not a good thing for the market overall. I think though that like
Marianne, I'm going to mute you because you keep on interrupting the.
I think that like part of the thing that would protect from that is basically that the market cap on any one asset is never going to be, you know, the amount of value that's drawn out against it is intended to never be like a crazy enough amount probably to warrant the amount of capital outflows that it would cost. So for example, right now, I think we've got a little over 1% of all Ethereum in Maker smart contract. costs a lot more. It would just cost a lot of money to artificially prop up the price of ETH for any kind of time interval, right? If for a few minutes or even a few days, there are certainly some whales out there that could do it, but
yeah, I think the likelihood for Ethereum would be very low.
Yeah, for
But,
Ethereum,
but,
very low.
but for a microcap, maybe if an insurer decided to come in and just say, I'm not going to pay out all these liquidations, I'm just going to throw $1 million into this microcap, and then ultimately,
I was more thinking that the insurance would look more like, especially if you develop this process around, if you develop this process further around being able to pay for other people's CDPs or wipe some of their debt. Essentially, what the insurance you would be paying for is not will cover the difference. It's basically that you're basically paying for a service that says, if you're in a situation where your CDP is underwater or is soon to go underwater, we will automatically top it up and charge you some fee for that service.
mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I was thinking, because I don't think it doesn't make sense to have 2 layers of fees, right? It get liquidated and then pay the insurance fee. It just makes more sense to have an insurance company, i.e. some kind of service provider, just simply top up the CDP for you.
Yeah, there needs to be some models generated, because the spread is going to be the premiums and the liquidation penalty, right? So they need to occupy that sweet spot between the two. So at some point, it's going to stop making sense. It's an interesting model to think about. Jordan has an interesting point. It's sort of like in hospitals having an incentive to stop people from getting sick because they don't want to get jacked on insurance, right? So potentially, if you treat it from that perspective, the health of the system would be sort of critical to insurers, which also maybe raises another point where the insurers would want to become involved with governance or the risk parameters or voting as well, because it'd be in their best interest to have the most conservative implementation possible. There's a lot of interesting things to think about, and no time to think about them. So actually, I'm going to see if we have any final questions and then wrap it up. Maybe Jordan asks, maybe insurance companies could create an asset that goes into CDPs and they interact directly with those wanting loans on their physical property. Oh, wow. Yeah, I have no idea. It sounds like a good idea in theory, though. I'm going to put that on the back burner for the next meeting, I think, because that's worth exploring. At the very least, I'm going to take it back to the grantees that I've been talking to about insurance. All right, 5 minutes left, and I have a hard stop at the top of the hour. So if anybody has any other final questions or comments they'd like to ask, do so now. Otherwise, I am going to call it. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thanks, Madison, for insights into how data analysis works. Thanks, Mariano and Lenka. And thanks, Ashley, for your business insight once again.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.